And we're back. This is a middle perch live on the internet. And I am your host, MTK on the MIC. Today we're going to be talking about the movable type briefly. You know, when I was in school, they always just taught us the same messages. And as the years pass, I realized that that was a method of propaganda, really, because how do I put this? As I get older and I continue to learn and read stuff all over the world, I come to find that there's a lot of holes in my knowledge. And, you can't blame someone else for that when libraries exist. You can't blame someone else for that when magazines and journals exist and when the internet exists. The internet is crowded with production that I think in some ways is problematic. But my point is, it's on you to make an effort. So I continue to do. I love learning. I am a philologist. I do think that that's something that is meaningful to me. Learning, constantly learning. And oh man, it happened again. My whole life, you know what they say to me, Gutenberg. Okay, if someone said to you who invented the printing press, and then you'd be like, oh, well, what do you mean? Like, and they go, no, I mean movable type, and you go, oh, Gutenberg, the Gutenberg Bibles, I went to the University of Texas at Austin from where I graduated, and they were so proud, both when I got there and throughout the time I was there, and probably to this day, that they have one there. And I went and saw it, of course. And it is a thing to be proud of. And I'm not trying to impinge upon the virtues of Gutenberg. But to find out at this stage in my life that movable print was not invented by Gutenberg, but rather by Bisheng, is a constant reminder of how the United States of America has consistently let me down. I went to schools, universities, and people didn't mention things. Worse, they decided to label things as invented by or discovered by or first of a kind that, as I've grown and read and spent time learning, are all just nonsense that are bricks in the foundation of the artificial praise for certain aspects of Western culture to maintain a kind of dominance that is unwarranted. Is it a God complex? It could be. But it's got to be let go of. There's no one culture anymore that can be seen that way. That's not what's going on. We are one race of being. And so I was very upset with that yesterday. But more importantly, what's beautiful is that we're going to read this article today, from which I learned that piece of information, which is fascinating. So he takes off. This is Andrew Marantz. By the way, look at that. That graphic is so awesome. I do collage, and the purposeful sort of clunkiness there is, I think, quite nice. That's figure one, the internet. But that's pretty good. That illustration is by Javier Jaén, or Jaén, Jae accent N. And this is a critic at large piece in the current New Yorker entitled "The More Things Change. Does Connecting the World Actually Make It Better?" This is by Andrew Marantz, and we're going to read this today. Before we do that, though, I want to also credit the New Yorker, and I've been thinking about that. I recently bought subscriptions for the two magazines that I always recommend to everybody, basically, a monthly and a weekly. I think that they round out the whole sort of spectrum of how that kind of production works. I worked in magazines, thanks to my ex, and who introduced me to that culture. Well, we were both coming up in San Francisco when we were both introduced to that culture, but she studied it in school and is an editor and was trained in the in the software of the time for that. And I was hired as first as a proofer, then as a researcher, proofer, fact checker, and then a little bit of writing. And magazine culture is really cool. That was something about New York I really liked. It's something about this sort of culture. I got to see it really up close and personal, and it's where I learned a lot about how to phrase things for print, for example. And the weekly that I recommend is The New Yorker, and has been for many years, despite the current president's hateful speech against it. I don't understand that. The New Yorker is and has been my whole life a weekly magazine that I've received and have read for many, many years, that is full of pretty good stuff, pretty good content. There are editors I have preferred, and there are editors that I don't agree with, but in general, it's a pretty good magazine. Now, because it's a weekly, it's produced totally differently from a monthly. You got to knock stuff out. People have to be in there. You're like, it's a weekly. So, and there are some pages that are being printed blue-lined earlier than others. For example, in the goings on about town, which I love. Anytime anybody's going to New York, I immediately just go, when are you going? I grab one of my New Yorkers and I rip out the first 6 pages, which has everything happening in New York. Nightlife, the theater, the whatever. I mean, it's all in the first few pages. Classical music, dance, art shows, right? I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. That's weekly. They're knocking that out. And I'm getting it here, 2,000 miles away, a week in advance. That's the beauty of having a subscription. And so I got one for my son, a subscription to a weekly, The New Yorker, and a monthly, which in my case is Harper's magazines. And other people always say The Atlantic. As soon as I say Harper's, they say The Atlantic. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction from the parents that I can hear coming through their mouths about conservatism and liberalism, both false, absurd concepts bantied about by idiots and manipulative propagandists. But I'm not talking about The Atlantic, though we received The Atlantic at home when I was a child. I think we stopped the subscription sometime in the early aughts. But as a child, my father subscribed to all of these magazines. We would receive Time, Newsweek, Harper's, The Atlantic, The Economist, The New Yorker, Le Monde Diplomatique, Foreign Affairs. These magazines came to my house in my father's name as a professor, and I was, young and capable of reading, so I was learning a tremendous amount from them. I would say certainly more than I was learning at school about the social sciences, and the hard sciences. I was never interested, not never interested, but they didn't interest me in the same way that my father and mother, who are scientists, who were fascinated by them and for whom they found meaning in it. But I could have also studied hard science at home, just through the journals and magazines that were arriving there. And when I speak in praise of my father, it's because he is the greatest student I've ever known. And he has become one of the best teachers ever. But he was the best student ever. He never missed an opportunity to teach himself something about the world. He taught himself 6 languages so that he wanted to read these papers that he was getting in a little village in India that were printed in Germany about chemistry, at the birth of what chemistry was doing, like we know modern chemistry today, Bayer and so on. There were academic papers being published there that he wanted to read. So he taught himself German so he could read the German articles. He is a true genius. He was cited by many, many people. He was invited everywhere in the world. His inventions are unique. The books in his name are extremely original work, still cited to this day. Early work on DMSO. His most famous patent for the United States military, I think is only a small part of what his intellect and abilities had done. And he taught me to just keep wanting to learn. And having all those magazines around, it was awesome. And for my son, I wanted him to have at least a couple of them. He doesn't read them as much, but even if they're around, I tell everybody what you do is you do what old John Fidef used to do. You hang a little string in the bathroom with 2 pins, and then you read as much as you want. And then when you're done, you just put it like that, and you hang it on the string, and you go. And the next time you come back, you can read a little more. That's the beauty of a magazine. The magazine is built and designed for this purpose. And then, of course, in recent years, everybody I say that to goes, "Why don't you just get a magazine rack, bruh?" And I'm like, okay. Talk about missing the forest tree. Magazines. Now the culture is disappearing. So how, I'm not sure. I definitely know that I read these things in long form on here because people I know are getting information from me because they don't have the time or the inclination or are just becoming illiterate. I don't mean that in a rude way. I mean illiterate. Wasn't it Twain who said an illiterate man and a man who doesn't read, right, are equal? They're not. If you don't read, then you're illiterate. is the sentiment here. And so if I at 52 am in that last group of people who are not academics now, I know all the academics are doing it. And I know in New York they're doing it. And I can say in LA they're doing it some, but it's such a other kind of media culture. San Francisco, it used to be true, but now the tech thing has changed to that in some ways. Is it like that in Paris anymore? London? I don't know. But New York, where that industry was born, that publishing industry that's so massive, where so much of how this is done was described, is definitely reading magazines. I mean, I don't know how to put that. Yeah, they're reading it online. I know, they're reading it online. But why would you do that? Is kind of what I'm getting at. So today we're going to read this. The critic at large section of The New Yorker is often all kinds of different people and thinkers. I've read Jill Lepore here many times. I've read Louis Menand here many times. Today we're reading Andrew Marantz. The More Things Change. Does connecting the world actually make it better? And it's a lot about social media, which we've been talking about on this program, particularly given the release of Dr. Siva Vaidyanathan's book, Anti-Social Media, the first book to address Facebook from the academic context, published by Oxford in England. Go out and buy it immediately or put it on your Kindle, etc. It is a comprehensive and well-organized, it is the only well-organized and proper critique of Facebook that exists, in my opinion, as far as I can tell. That said, today we have an interesting article by Andrew Marantz. The More Things Change, Does Connecting the World Actually Make It Better? We're going to be reading that. Should we just launch into it? I suppose we should. I'm going to end up cutting the chunk that becomes reading this out. So why don't we have a little more music while I set that up? That, by the way, is a track called Kolchak the Dawn Stalker that I made a few months ago. How about this one from yesterday?
all going to shit now, and you never say a word. The elections are fixed. The wars are in place. The surveillance is total, and you never say you never said a word. You never said a word. It's all going to shit now, and you never say